area, and then I can tell you about what you're seeing, and then you can take photographs. So if I could just have your attention briefly so I can tell you a little bit about this end of the site you're visiting. I'd just like to give you a very warm welcome. This is the second group from Arizona to come to the garden this week, so it's great, and it's great to see more American groups coming back to Israel. A lot of groups from England, where I live, and from your part of the world have been put off, haven't they, by the Troubles. But I believe really that it's not quite as bad as it appears in the media, isn't it? We get a very negative and rather grim picture, so it's good that you can come back and feel relaxed and enjoy being here. Now this site that you're visiting, the Garden 2, belongs to an independent British trust, and they bought it in 1894 because for many Christians this is the place, well, could be the place where Jesus was crucified, and of course where he was buried and raised to life. Now we can't be sure because there is not sufficient evidence. For many people it could be the site of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which you may have visited during your time here. At the moment, of course, that place is inside the city wall, and the great debate is whether it was outside at the time of Jesus, and at the moment we can't know for sure whether that was the case or not. Now this site does fit the biblical account remarkably well. The Bible tells us, doesn't it, that Jesus died outside the city gate, and of course we've got the Damascus gate nearby, and it also says he died near to the city, and behind you you can see the northern end of the old city of Jerusalem. There are the walls not far away. Now if you look across here, that cliff is part of an ancient quarry. 3,000 years ago they were probably digging up stone from this area for the building of the first temple, Solomon's temple, and they probably also used stone from here for the second temple, the temple that was expanded by Herod the Great. Now when this site was exhausted of the stone, that's the cliff that remained, and according to Jewish tradition this site became an execution site called a place of stoning, where the Jews would bring their victims, often offenders against their religious code, and throw them from the top of that hill or stone them at the base of it. And you get that sort of picture in our Gospels, don't you? Do you remember when Jesus was preaching at Nazareth and he really upset them there by what he was saying, and it said they took him to the edge of the town and prepared to throw him off, and that's just what you've got here. Now, we generally think that the Romans would have also used this site for crucifixion, because the Romans always crucified people in very public places because they wanted the crowds to see these terrible scenes of torture, and it would act as a deterrent against rebellion. And this is a very busy place, not only today, you see that's the East Jerusalem bus station, but the road to Jericho and the road to Damascus converge at this point. So you get lots of people passing by the site and would have seen the crucifixion. And again you get that picture in our Gospels, don't you? Do you remember when Jesus was on the cross, it said people passing by hurled insults at him on the cross. And they had to be near enough to see that inscription over the cross, and also the people actually spoke to him, didn't they, and shouted at him. So now we believe that the crosses would have been down at ground level, not on the top of a hill. We Christians often have this image, don't we, of 3 crosses on a green hill. Now the Bible doesn't say anything about a hill, and it's much more likely the crosses were down at ground level, the crowds very close, pushing in on these terrible scenes. The other interesting thing about that cliff, which I'm sure some of you know, it's got an almost skull-like appearance. You can see those like eye sockets, can you, and what appears to be the bridge of a nose. And if you look at this picture, this is what it was like 120 years ago. And it's almost more skull-like in this picture than you see it today, because it has like a mouth there. Unfortunately, that's disappeared with the building of the bus station that's raised the level of the ground. But it is interesting, isn't it? We know Jesus died at a place called Golgotha, the Aramaic word meaning place of the skull. And here we have a skull-like cliff with that skull-like image upon it. We can't be sure that it looked like that at the time of Jesus, but it's just interesting, isn't it? And it has this tradition of being an execution site. Now, some other very interesting symbolism you find in this area is that that cliff is part of Mount Moriah that goes right back to where the Temple Mount is. I think you've been on the Temple Mount, haven't you? And when you went in the Dome of the Rock, you saw that bare piece of rock, didn't you?
We didn't go in.
You didn't go in. Well, inside, but it's called the Dome of the Rock because it covers this very special piece of rock which Christians and which Jews and Muslims all venerate, because it's believed Abraham prepared to sacrifice Isaac on that stone. But of course we know that God stayed his hand, didn't he, and provided a substitute, a ram. Now, in a sense, that's like a foreshadowing of the crucifixion itself, when God gave his only son to die on the cross for us. But what's so powerful about that is that that event was to be fulfilled when Jesus dies on the same ridge of Mount Moriah. You can see their symbolism there, can't you? The other interesting point you might like to know about, you see where the minaret is, where you get the Muslim call to prayer, the tower with the green top to it. In that area where a building unfortunately is going up, there is an ancient cave in there known as Jeremiah's Grotto. And again, according to Jewish tradition, the prophet Jeremiah was imprisoned in this cave, and while there he wrote the book of Lamentations, part of our Bible of course. And one of the verses you may remember, again, is like a foreshadowing of the sufferings of Jesus on the cross, and it says, "Is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Behold and see if there any suffering like unto my suffering." Now, if that did happen here, it's amazing that hundreds of years before Jesus was to die on the cross, Jeremiah was writing those words that spoke about the sufferings that Jesus was to endure for us when he died on that cross. So you can see there's some very powerful symbols here in this area that suggest quite strongly that this could be the place. Now, one final point that may interest you from a biblical point of view. In the book of Leviticus, it says that the temple sacrifices took place at the northern end of the temple. You may remember that. And here we are at the northern end of the city. So again, you know, for us, the temple sacrifices were in a sense preparing us for the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And here at this end, that event possibly took place. So it all comes together, doesn't it, to say, yes, this could be the place. But in a sense, you know, the most important thing about this site, and what we most want visitors to hear and think about, of course, is what that sacrifice on the cross means to us now, and what we can experience and the significance of it. Can I just mention one other verse before we go on to see the rest of this place? You may remember in John's Gospel it says, at the place where Jesus was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Do you remember that one? Now, to find the site where Jesus died, all those three have to be together, don't they? Now, we've seen the possible site of the crucifixion, we're going to see an ancient garden and then the tomb, but we can talk about that more as we go round. If there's any questions you want to ask me at this point, please ask.
Who discovered this?
This site, yes, I will tell you more about it, but it wasn't discovered until 1867, the tomb. But some of you might like to know, there was a British general called General Gordon. Have any of you ever heard of him? No, you have. Well, he was a famous general, and he was assassinated at Khartoum, that's right. And he was also a sort of amateur biblical scholar. And he came regularly to the Holy Land, and he stayed with an American family called the Spafford family, who did a lot of missionary work in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land. And that was their house, you can see, and it's still there today. I think it's a sort of hospice now. But he looked across it, and he was convinced this was the site of the crucifixion. And because of his fame, it helped to focus attention on this place. But I can tell you more about what happened after that when we go round. But if you'd like to just take some photographs now, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is the remains of the water systems, the storing water. It's got a hole in the top.
No, yeah, yeah.
If you remember that,
Well, next picture of the skull.
I called them up.
I didn't claim it like that.
I thought you said you found mark of a problem in there.
Oh, he's down there.
Oh, we're not had enough here.
When?
Yeah, primroses. Yeah. I like the tail of the primrose.
I don't even know what that is.
Yeah. The purple and white, that's cabbage, it's tail. And the others are primrose. Look, my shoes are tied again. Go ahead, I'll be up in there.
Well, you spend a lot of time standing when you're touring around, and you can get really tired. Get a lot of information thrown at you as well, don't you? It's quite difficult to retain it. Probably the most important things are the impressions that are left with you rather than lots of facts and figures. Yes. Right folks, we're just making a brief stop in the centre of the garden before we go down to see the tomb itself. Now we said in John's Gospel it spoke about at the place where Jesus was crucified there was a garden. Well, there's a beautiful garden here today, but what's the evidence to say there was one here 2,000 years ago at the time of Jesus? If you look at this photograph, I think this shows you part of the evidence that suggests very strongly that there was a garden here at that time. Now I know some of you have been here before, but those of you who haven't, can you tell me what that is?
A ladder, this one.
No, yeah, well it is a ladder, certainly. Don't take any notice of those people. That was just a posed picture. It's what they're in that matters. Sorry? It's a cistern, that's right, that lady's exactly right. It's a very large water cistern. As you may know, in the past they dug these underground caves to store water during the winter season, so they'd have a plentiful supply during the summer. This one, I'm standing over it, it's just under our feet here, is the third largest water cistern in Jerusalem. It takes about 200,000 gallons of water, and it's pre-Christian, and therefore it was certainly around at the time of Jesus. Now the presence of this water cistern and also an ancient wine press, which I can show you, suggests very strongly this was a garden at the time of Jesus. Not the sort of garden we English think of with lots of flowers, but probably a vineyard or an olive grove. And of course it could have been the garden of Joseph of Arimathea, because we know Joseph was a wealthy man, wasn't he? He was a member of the Jewish council, and he had become a follower of Jesus with Nicodemus. And he received the body of Jesus from the cross, and the Bible tells us he took the body to his own family tomb in the garden. And this could have been that garden that Joseph owned and ran. We can't be sure. Now, if you'd come to this site in the middle of the 19th century, you wouldn't have seen the beautiful garden that you're seeing now, neither would you have seen that tomb. And it wasn't until 1867 that that tomb was first uncovered. And when it was uncovered, a group of English Christians became very interested, raised enough money through an appeal in the Times newspaper of London, and were able to buy this entire site, which is about an acre in size, after considerable opposition from the Turks, because this was part of the Ottoman Empire at that time. Then they gradually cleared the site and excavated it and developed it as you see today. And in a sense, I think God has preserved this place. Whether it is the right place or not, we can't be sure, because it's been a great blessing to so many thousands of Christians over the years who come here and they can just think about, what took place and what it means to us today. So I think, it's serving a very precious purpose, and I hope you'll agree when you've finished here today. So just one other point about this cistern. They discovered in here 2 plaster crosses on the rock face, which again suggests early Christian interest in this site, and we're going to see further evidence of that as we go around the site. So we believe early on Christians were showing a lot of interest in this site. Because, so much of Jerusalem was destroyed, wasn't it? You remember in AD 70 the Roman legions surrounded Jerusalem, and they stormed the city eventually and burnt down the temple, pulled down the walls, and this whole area was just a scene of devastation. And you can imagine how difficult it would be to find things that they were just buried. And we show such an interest in the tomb, don't we? We long to know where the actual place was, but the early Christians, perhaps they weren't the least bit interested in the tomb, because they'd experienced the risen Lord Jesus themselves, and the tomb was empty as far as they were concerned, and where it was didn't matter. But I'm not saying it doesn't matter, because obviously it is of interest to us, but I think you need to bear that in mind. Right, folks, as we go down to the tomb, you might just like to look in that wall bit, and you can see the top of the water system. It's actually full of water now because we've had so much rain this winter, and we actually use water from this system to water the garden today. So it's doing the same job as it did 2,000 years ago. So it's great. Shall we go down and have a look at the tomb?
First and second, or I think so.
Yes, it is. The rain.
Turn off. It's got a lot of water in it.
Really reflects the heat down here. It sort of bounces off the rocky surface. It can be like a furnace here when it's in the midsummer. I mean, you know all about heat in Arizona, don't you? So I don't need to tell you. Desert region. Just wait for the others to come down. Just tell you a little bit about this part that you're visiting. Now, I said that it wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that this area was uncovered. Now, it was in 1867 that a Greek man who owned part of this land was digging here, hoping to establish the site of another water system, and he uncovered the tomb. And when he realised it was an ancient tomb, he decided that he didn't want the site, and that's when this group of English Christians took it over, and they gradually cleared the site and revealed the tomb exactly as you see it now, except at that early date, unfortunately, that side of it had collapsed due to earthquake damage, and they they put these blocks, stone blocks in its place. Not very attractive, I don't think, but that was done early on, and nothing else has been done to this tomb since it was uncovered in 1867. So it's exactly as you see it now. And where you're standing is probably the original level of the site, the rock bed. Now the tomb itself, again, fits the biblical account remarkably well. This is a large tomb, it's not a cave, it's cut out of solid rock. And because it's large, it suggests very much that it was the tomb of a wealthy person, like Joseph of Arimathea. A poor person couldn't have afforded to construct a tomb of this size. And as you may know, the entrance to the tomb was sealed by a large rolling stone, a bit like that one there that those two are leaning against. It's very much, that it is a rolling stone of that period. But the one that we're talking about was very large, we think, about a ton in weight, about 6 feet in diameter. And of course the Bible tells us it was a great stone, a very large stone, and the women said, who will move it, didn't they? Fortunately, an angel came down, didn't he? And there was a violent earthquake. And strangely enough, there is evidence of earthquake damage there, quite a considerable damage, that great crack going across there. So, you know, it's a wonderful opportunity just to visualize what happened. The violent earthquake, the angel came down, he rolled the stone away and sat on it. And the guards, we're not sure whether they were temple guards or whether they were Roman soldiers, they were probably Roman soldiers, they just fell down as if they were dead, they were so terrified. It was a pretty awesome event, wasn't it? And it's just wonderful just to visualize that happening here. And then after the women looked into the tomb and saw it was empty, they went back, didn't they, to tell the disciples, and it says that John and Peter came running down here to see for themselves. And it says that John got here first, and it says he bent over and looked in. Now that's just what he would have had to have done, because the entrance was nowhere near as high as you see it now. We think it was only about 1 meter high. So you can just picture John would have to bend over and look in, wouldn't he? And then Peter comes, and of course Peter being impetuous, he goes straight in, doesn't he? And then John himself goes in, and it says John saw and he believed. Now what did he see that made him believe? What was so convincing to him? Exactly. It was the grave clothes, wasn't it? I mean, if the body had been stolen, they would have been cast aside, wouldn't they? Or taken away altogether. But in this case, they appeared to be in exactly the positions they were wrapped around the body of Jesus, undisturbed. And John was convinced that some miraculous event had taken place. So that you know, could have happened here. So it's wonderful to think about it. Now the tomb itself, which you're just about to go into, when you go in the entrance, you'll be standing in that area known as the weeping chamber, where the mourners would have stood. On the right-hand side, that's the burial chamber. Now only one grave was completed, that in the right-hand corner. That's the one to look at, because if this was the tomb of Jesus, that's where his body would have lain there. These here, archaeologists have suggested, were never completed, and because they weren't completed, it suggests that it was a new tomb. And what does John's Gospel tell us it was? It was a new tomb. So again, it fits it very well. The other interesting point you might like to bear in mind when you're in there, it said, you remember in Mark's Gospel, I think, it said that when the women went in, it said on the right was a young man in white, an angel. He said, he is not here, he is risen. And it is interesting that in this particular tomb, which is unusual, it was on the right. So just a small little point, you know, it's all fitting that particular picture. Now on the outside, I'd just like to tell you this before you go in. You might like to notice the way it's shaped over the top and the ledges. And also behind you here, you can see cut out in the rock bed that shape with this channel dug across the rock bed going into 2 water cisterns that are underground behind those doors. Now all that has suggested that this could have been an early church constructed on the outside. We can't be sure, suggesting that Christians were interested in the site early on. And if you just have a look up here, you might like to see this symbol that's been cut on the rock face. rather indistinct. I don't know if you can see it. Carved here, that bit at the top and the upright coming down to a hook. Does that suggest any particular symbol to you?
Fishes a man on the cross.
It's a cross, that's right. It's a special sort of cross called an anchor cross. And the idea of that comes from the letter to Hebrews that speaks about Jesus being the anchor of our faith. And that was adopted as an early Christian symbol. So it is interesting that all these things show some Christian influence, an interest in the site. And when you go into the tomb, when you look across, you'll see a cross that's been put on the wall. It's a Byzantine cross, and it's got the Greek letters on it, Alpha and Omega, Jesus Christ, the first and the last. But as I said at the beginning, we can't be absolutely certain this site is the place. But I just feel that God perhaps doesn't want us to know for sure, because if we did know with that sort of certainty, I think we might be tempted to worship the place and not the living Lord Jesus who we know now. And that's the most important thing. So this site, in a sense, is like a wonderful visual aid just to help you think afresh about what it means to you. So go and look at it for yourselves now, folks, and thank you for listening.
I want to share something.
Yes.
Last time we were here, there were two angels seen by...
That's right, that's in one of the other Gospels. Our friend who's quite right, and again you can imagine this because it said there were two angels, one seated at the head and the foot. And there are places there that would be possible. Again, only speculation, but it's quite a powerful thought.
So the foreshadow, the two angels,
Yes.
and Christ being the propitiation.
Yes.
And he's the lid, and the angels on the mercy were over as a mercy seat,
Yes.
seen in the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes.
And you can see the Ark of the Covenant here, the lid.
Well, yes, it's
the
possible.
Two angels. And
That's right. I didn't tell you about that window. You might just be interested to know what that is. Apparently, Jews in their tombs early on, they had a hole in the side of their tomb, quite often called a nephesh, which means soul. And according to their tradition, that after the person was in the tomb for 3 days, the soul departed through that hole after 3 days. So it's interesting. The other interesting thing, it allows light to fall on that actual grave where the body of Jesus would have lain, if that is true. And it enables someone to look in from outside and actually see whether it's empty or not, which would not have been possible in many Jewish tombs of that time. So they're all just interesting pointers.
was any stone?
No, we've never found the original stone. Of course, we'd love to have it. It would be great, but it's never been found. There's no evidence of it at all. What you have to remember is there's so much destruction has taken place, and these things have just been lost forever. So please go and see it now for yourselves.
Any other inscriptions on the wall at all?
No, there aren't any other inscriptions except that box I was telling you about the Greek letter.
There's a Greek letter.
You'll see when you go in, if you look across to the burial chamber, there's a cross. It's got the Greek letters, Alpha and Omega, that you know, it's the first and the last. Yes. That's good. It's a pleasure. Yeah, I didn't realise. I was just confirming your place of communion just up there. Did you see it as we went by?
Yes.
Good, yes. Just go up those steps and immediately left. Okay, thank you. Turn around.
Go ahead, Ben. You want? Oh, sorry. You guys go ahead. I'm gonna get it when it's empty. Turn around.
And another little ring on the inside of his head.
So, for about 10 years living in Hamburg, and I knew all of that, and I knew one or two of them still working at the site. So it's good to see you. Small world, isn't it?
Get it out.
It looks like it's that's what it was. That's what he said. That's what he's trying to tell us.
You should go in with Chelsea because you're videotaping and so is she.
It doesn't matter. We'll go.
About the mercy seat, the cherubim and angels, and that being the lid being the mercy seat. And I'll speak to you through mercy, not through the law. And the Pharisees tried to approach God through the law, through the Ten Commandments. And how many times did Jesus rebuke them for that and quote to them Hosea 6:6, which says, "For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offering." I will speak to you through mercy. I am the sacrifice. I'll speak to you through mercy.
The first time he said that was at Matthew's party. All the sinners were, and the people came up and said, "What are you doing eating with the sinners?" He said, "Go, what you know about that scripture? Go learn of mercy, and I desire mercy." That's what he said. End of his first year. He had somebody miss communion.
I come to
This is the one I thought I was talking about.
Ross, sing Holy Ground.
Standing on holy ground?
Yeah. I like that.
We are standing on holy ground, and I know that there are angels all around. Let us praise Jesus now. That's what they said. That's the Presbyterian church.
Well, I came from a Baptist church, and I know
That's what we sang. That was
That's
Pastor
what-
Allen. Pastor Allen.
Well, I can't sing it all, so I can't say anything about anybody else.
She always will.
I think this is it down here. This is where the no, they would probably walk up there
Yeah.
on them, and it would come out this spigot down here.
Right. Exactly. So up there where Bob was taking pictures, that was actually it, I'm
Definitely
sure.
the garden.
Yeah, you can
in the
see where
vineyard.
all the places where it would come out into that area there.
I don't remember that circular shape around it so clearly last time, where obviously they had a building, you know, some kind of building built there.
Wait to sit there. No, get it for the effort. Yeah, get it for the effort.